What you just said was terrifying. And I don't think we have 50 or 80 years. And we better not think in those terms, that we are incrementally worrying about moving an inch at a time. People have been asking, why was there a significant worldwide protest against a war in Syria last year with barely a noise now? And the U.S. has always had to create a justification for its military action, and people have been burned by the fantasy weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. The issue of chemical weapons in Syria smelled too much like Iraq, and people were heartily sick of wars that accomplished nothing, or at least not the war makers' stated goals. The war makers never say, we're fighting this war to control and steal the resources of the rest of the world. Otherwise, they might not have any support. This year, the drama of ISIS, an unknown group swarming through the Middle East and beheading Americans, was intensified by the bought media and scared more people. Even people in the peace movement got scared and feel threatened. There's a cartoon that was wonderful in the Globe the other day, and it says, these people are watching the news and in bed, and they're cowering in their beds, and the guy, the husband, I guess, says, so what new manufactured crisis is going to paralyze us with fear today? And this is called Mourning in America. And I think that's very relevant. So part of this is American exceptionalism. We are civilized. We don't behead people. No, we blow them to smithereens with drones and rockets. We send countries back to the Dark Ages. We torture people by unspeakable means. We finance Israel's horrendous siege and genocidal destruction of Gaza. We are much better. In fact, we are the best in the world, the best polluters, the biggest economy and military, the biggest criminal pariah state, the best propaganda machine, the country with the biggest prison system in the world, a massive intelligence apparatus that spies on everyone, and the biggest, most mighty imperialist power. We have a government that after 13 years of war has caused destabilization, death, and destruction to many parts of the world with no end in sight, that has bases all over the world and engages in wars in all its forms, overt and covert, from boots on the ground, drones, rockets, proxy wars, special ops and mercenary wars, counterinsurgency, on and on, cyber wars and more. Ed Snowden did a great service to the world in exposing the extent of the surveillance state that we live under. For his truth-telling, his life is in serious danger, I believe, and he is unable to leave Russia. The man who blew the whistle on the CIA torture is in jail, while the torturers are home free. Well, according to all the polls, people are still sick of war, but simultaneously they are sick of a bipartisan single war party government that represents corporate, financial, and military interests, that lies, manipulates, spies on them and the world, spends trillions on endless wars while implementing punishing austerity measures at home that targets working people, particularly people of color. With the discrepancy between the obscenely rich and the 99% never been greater. A racist, undemocratic government that brutalizes, incarcerates, and disenfranchises the poor, especially millions of black and brown citizens. Now, how do we know that people are still sick of war and are really not trusting this government? I think we need only to look at the midterm elections, where the winner was clearly none of the above. The 34% turnout was the lowest in 72 years, with the under 30 vote down from 19% to 13%, and voting by blacks and Latinos much reduced. We saw congressional approval ratings of minuscule amounts, 14%. A Gallup poll in 2013 showed that 60% of Americans thought the Democrats and Republicans do such a poor job that a third party is needed. This is what Americans believe, but they don't feel they have any power to do anything about it. And that, I think, is going to change. We've witnessed a massive transfer of wealth to the corporate rich and the banks and the war machine. They're trying to privatize everything that we assumed belonged to the public. Even water is no longer a basic human right. They spent trillions of our dollars to bail out the banks, and no one went to jail, and plunging the world into worldwide depression. The capitalist system has one overriding imperative: expand and profit or die. This is accomplished by competition, financial bubbles, austerity programs, and more. Social justice and environmental concerns play no part. Their periodic crises are resolved through austerity programs that cut essential services and by war. Putting our faith or energy on elections and influencing Congress is not only a waste of time, but it is harmful to building a movement to end war privation and injustice, and to curb the now inevitable global warming. The cost of running an election, Supreme Court rulings, and restricted media access ensures a bought politicians who must cater to their handlers or be booted out. Once elected, they ensure that laws benefit the ruling rich. We can't talk about the rule of law in the abstract. Whose law? The law that benefits the power elite does not work for the rest of us. The entire criminal justice system in this country is rigged. Prisons are now places of torture and slave labor and run by privatized profit makers on a large scale. Poverty is now a crime. When people can't even pay minor fines, then their additional fines are placed on them and they go to jail because they're poor. When the grand jury system, as we see, doesn't work for us, it works for them. People are coerced to plead guilty and plea bargain to avoid lengthy sentences, and then, as convicted felons, are disempowered for life. We must not forget that what the Nazis did was legal. They just passed the laws that allowed them to act with impunity. Wars with no limits today are authorized and reauthorized by Congress or just acted on by the commander-in-chief. The organized left and labor, mostly co-opted by the Democratic Party and lesser evilism, has been so weakened that it has not been effective in struggling against the actions of the major imperialist power on earth. In fact, the left, particularly the anti-war movement, has not recovered from the first Obama election in 2008. The same left, I predict, will not learn from this, and they will invariably support the Democratic Party while demonizing the Republicans. If Hillary Clinton is the candidate, her record as a war hawk and staunch friend of Israel's will be expunged, and she will be extolled as the climate change champion, the anti-racist candidate, the advocate for women's rights, or what have you. What is hopeful today is that inevitably we see mass responses to the injustices and repression. It is inevitable. Look at the recent uprisings and campaigns just in the United States that have won some victories in the most recent period. We had that massive march on climate change in New York, the rise of the Students for Justice in Palestine and the Gaza protests, the movement for immigrant rights, the Occupy movement for marriage equality, the $15 an hour campaign, and the election in Seattle of socialist candidate Kshama Sawant. These are things that are going on all over the country. We can't predict when they're going to happen, but we know that the conditions are such that they will happen. Of course, the most exciting thing, if you look out the window, it's the uprising initially over the non-indictment of the police murder in Ferguson, but it's now reawakening the new stage of the civil rights movement that says Black life matters. The struggle is not over desegregation and voting rights. Today it is tackling the systemic racism and oppression of Black people in the country. Police brutality and racial profiling, mass incarceration, poverty, etc., and building a new, young, fighting leadership independent from the major parties. They are making demands for what is needed. They are not asking people to call their congressional representatives and beg for support. Because of this, they are forcing the president to say something. Hillary Clinton spoke out, and other politicians have to come on the bandwagon and take minimal action. And where were these leaders over the time when thousands of other victims were being brutalized and even murdered by a militarized police force? They didn't open their mouths. These struggles, as I said, are inevitable because the conditions necessitate that people start fighting back. The corporate powers are well aware of this and preparing for it. It is not an accident that the police force has been militarized, that the NSA spies on all of us, especially the dissidents, and potential leaders of struggles that we see now and coming, and that the Patriot Act and many other laws and orders to stifle opposition have been laid in place. Our role is to do the same that the people who are fighting in the streets today are doing. Almost done. Okay. We cannot rely on Congress or the UN, which the U.S. and other major powers use to do their bidding when convenient and ignore it when it is not, to join with every social movement in the streets in mass protest and to connect the issues to their source, the imperialist drive for expanding profit and dominance. We need to stay in the streets and make demands for what we want and do not want. We don't need to tell them what percentage of their budget should go for this, that, or the other. None of it is acceptable. The war budget is not acceptable. This rotten system needs to be brought down and replaced by one that meets the needs of the majority of the world and the planet itself. We won't get there by voting for the war makers. We won't get there by imploring them to do better. We won't get there by incremental reforms. We won't get there by relying on the Supreme Court or the UN or their diplomacy. We need a real independent mass third party in this country. We need to unite the movements that are fragmented. We need to educate ourselves and others and continually point the finger at those who are responsible. We need to keep our groups and coalitions going and expand them, especially working with the youth of today. I encourage you also to go to the United National Anti-War Coalition Conference, which is being held in New Jersey next May. There's some flyers about it on the back table, and to get on our mailing list. This is going to be an extremely important conference because it brings activists from all the different struggles together, and we debate and discuss the issues and come out with an action plan, and I hope you all come.